As you're building all your favorite characters from a particular nation, trying to make them as cracked as possible through your own sheer willpower and simping, getting them to be triple crowned ASAP so you can flex them in front of everyone. Have you ever encountered this problem where most of your favorite characters from that country use literally the same talent materials, thus forcing you to splurge all your resin in one day just to crown them all as fast as possible? If you have experienced this before and kept on wondering why in the world you were so unfortunate, well, let me tell you that there's a simple explanation for this phenomenon. It's just that you appear to have a type, as in you enjoy a certain character archetype, personality, or story arc, or even just vibe, which manifests in your favorites gravitating together. Then you may be wondering, aren't the talent mats assigned randomly or arbitrarily? Well, allow me to reveal to you that it is anything but. Of course, it's sometimes hard to tell because the English translation at least uses words that feel kinda vague or a bit obscure, but these talent mats are named after concepts that represent the values each nation upholds, with each character being assigned to the value which seems to align best with their personality and goals. Hence today, as the title suggests, I'm going to attempt to predict which talent mats each unreleased Fontaine character will use from the selection of equity, justice, and order. And I'll infer these according to what we know so far of their personalities and their roles in society. But before that, I need to lay out a bunch of disclaimers, like firstly, the talent mats to be used by the likes of Fremine, Nouvellette, and Weasley have been leaked already, and I do know what these are, so I can't pretend to predict them while already knowing what they are, and I'm also not gonna mention the leaks, so don't expect them to come up in this video. Also, this is really just speculation, so if you feel like you agree with my guess on your favorite characters' mats, you can hoard your talent mats of that category, or you can save your resin to anticipate the release, or you can prevent yourself from using these mats to level up other characters which aren't your favorites. But please don't spend resin for an unreleased character's talent mats right away, as my guesses could be horribly wrong. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the video, and if you do enjoy these kinds of content, I'd appreciate if you could subscribe to this channel to anticipate more of my videos along these lines. Before I talk about Fontaine's talent mats, I'd like to quickly go through the way characters had been assigned to their respective talent mats in previous nations, so you can get a better sense of the logic behind my future talent mat predictions. You can also choose to skip this part though if you're impatient. With that said, starting with Mondstadt, you have Freedom, Resistance, and Ballad. You can observe that lots of Freedom users are on the rather young side, since they're likely to be very free-spirited in pursuing their desires without the constraints of the harshness and rigidity of adulthood. Meanwhile, you'll notice that all resistance users are rather brave with their desire to defend their nation or pursue their goals fearlessly in spite of imminent threats. Then Ballad may be difficult to crack at first because it technically just refers to a poetic song, but ballad users tend to be great storytellers or characters that have to define their identities for themselves. Thus, they have to learn how to tell their own story, so to speak, even if it's not through literal singing. In Liyue, I think there's a lot of emphasis on hard work and the fruits of your labor. Diligence very obviously pertains to hard work, and thus the characters that fall under this category are without a doubt very hardworking and persistent in achieving their goals, focusing a lot on honing their craft. Now, prosperity and gold seem a bit more confusing since they almost come across as synonymous, since if you're prosperous, you have lots of gold, right? But from what I'm observing from the characters under prosperity, there's an emphasis on their excellence in prestigious fields of work or prestigious art forms in Liyue, while gold users are also well regarded, but they strike out on their own more often, pursuing what they value the most even if it doesn't always align with the popular opinion. So I interpret gold in this sense to represent their true values rather than something monetary. But either way, there's a theme of excellence and character satisfaction on both ends, although this is just my way of making sense of things. When it comes to Inazuma, oh boy, their maths are the most difficult to decipher because the language used is kinda obscure and eternity is actually really hard to define, so values stemming from eternity are also difficult to understand. Heck, even transience is opposite to eternity. And I guess that's why you have a lot of resistance members using transience, and the descriptions of the transience mats emphasize mortal dreams. So I guess you have lots of transience users who value the present moment and improving present conditions for Inazuma. As for elegance, I view its users as people who have to reckon with their place in society and how they present themselves, which is why you have both nobles and Arataki gang members because of their strong themes of persona crafting, I'd say. Out of these, light was the most difficult for me to comprehend because light in itself is just brightness and it depends on what you associate with it. But the description mentions yearning, so I guess light users often yearn for something greater. But I also feel like light users don't have a shared vibe to them, so personally I just say, whoever you think doesn't fall into transience or elegance is a light user because it's really hard to identify without the process of elimination. Out of all the nations so far, I believe that Sumeru's talent categories are by far the easiest to identify. Admonition means reprimanding, so you can easily see all the admonition users being very strict. Ingenuity refers to creativity, so characters who desire innovation or adopt a progressive mentality easily fall under this category. They're often very philosophical as well, except for one of them who's just a creative scammer. Then for praxis, it's basically just practice. So, characters who are actively honing a practical or artistic skill that's not necessarily academic in nature, or someone who's attempting personal development easily falls under praxis. See, it's very cut and dried. Classifications are easy in this case. Unfortunately, Fontaine is not gonna be like Sumeru in terms of ease of categorizing. Of course, all the 3 talent mats for each nation are interconnected, but looking at the words themselves, I don't think other nations can beat Fontaine with how interconnected their talent mat names are. If you want to truly be the exemplar of justice, you need equity and order too. Those just naturally come together. Hence, you will notice that, technically speaking, if you analyze the Fontaine characters deeply, many of them will possess all 3 of these values, but one will truly stand out in describing the character well. A notable example is Chief Justice Neuvillette, who is the pinnacle of all justice, equity, and order, but the talent mats he does use suits him the best, I promise you. So if you liken it to multiple choice, Fontaine talent mats are less like choosing the correct answer and more like choosing the best answer. Thus, I have to employ other techniques to fit each Fontaine character into the respective category. First, I will perform a process of elimination, and 2, I'll try to define the sort of vibes that I expect characters from each category to have, since, like with let's say the gold books that I mentioned earlier, gold in itself doesn't mean much, but looking for similarities among gold users can help us identify what to expect from future gold users. With that, it's still worth defining what I associate with the terms equity, justice, and order. Out of these, order is the easiest to isolate since I can imagine a sort of strict seriousness possessed by future order users who will likely be very disciplined and rule or law-abiding, but also potentially controlling and rigid. Lynette, an order user, isn't exactly super rigid in her conduct, but she does set boundaries and uses rules to enforce this, which is why she says work-related inquiries should be directed towards Linnae, and inquiries about seeing the magic show should be directed towards the ticket office. Plus, she's also a bit more on the serious side, at least on the surface, which is something that I think we can expect from future order users. When it comes to equity, I view it as representative of equal rights, which is a concept invoked by the description of teachings of equity. So equity users will probably be very adamant on making sure that everyone gets treated fairly and everyone gets to listen to, with none being allowed to suffer oppression or discrimination. I think equity users would have a passion for public service and looking out for the well-being of Fontaine as a whole. So they're very dedicated to helping the general populace in a sense. We can observe this with how Liyue, our first equity user, is very insistent on saving Fontaine from the prophecy and wants to distribute magic bags to assist everyone in preparing for the upcoming disaster. Even his work as a magician is catered to the satisfaction of the public, with him wanting to appeal to a wide demographic. To me, these are all signs that he falls well under equity. Now, equity is commonly used in line with social justice, so it can be hard to distinguish these, but I think justice users are more passionate about a particular stance and can sometimes be a little punitive in their pursuit of it, like wanting to punish wrongdoers. Justice is described by the talent mats to be represented by a sword, so there is a certain fighting or condemnation aspect to the concept of justice, I believe. I feel like justice users often take on heroic roles also as a result. So finally, getting onto the actual speculations, starting with Navia. I would easily rule out Order because we often see her dealing with problems using unconventional means, often defying regular court proceedings, and she's also far from serious in her disposition. Although she values the plight of the oppressed, which can be in line with equity, I would more closely assign her to justice because she's someone who really attempts to fight for what she believes in, with her manner of confronting her uncle figure even. Like, the sword imagery really works well with her. There's huge protagonist energy to her also, which screams justice to me. As for Charlotte, I'm greatly inclined to categorize her as an equity user simply because journalism is something I perceive to be in line with public service, and she bridges the knowledge gap between important people and the general populace, giving them equal access to key bits of information that can allow any person to be the judge of current events themselves, hence this concept of the court of public opinion. With Sigewinne, I have some trouble identifying what her talent mats could be since I'm not so sure what her personality or social role is yet, but she appears to work in the Fortress of Meripede, a correctional facility. And she also apparently gives lectures on cosmetics and skincare, so on one hand, she could be an Order user due to her workplace being focused on enforcing discipline, but I think her using equity mats is still possible if she does this sort of public education thing, which is in line with my association of equity with public service. So overall, I'm still quite unsure about where Sigewinne falls, but so far I'd rule out justice for her mats, but even that's still not very definitive as an opinion from me. Next is Clorinde, who I actually think truly screams Order, like as Furina's bodyguard. She keeps people in line and she also maintains the integrity of duelists, strictly following the rules regarding the setup, going so far as to even obey her opponent's wishes, as she did with Kalas, even if he wanted to be killed. Regardless of her beliefs, she won't really break the rules so as to keep the fairness in the process of dueling, which somewhat leads her to equity a bit, but her overall serious personality still makes me very inclined to categorize her as an Order user. Oftentimes, if you have to fight against Clorinde, it's a sign that you're battling against the establishment, so all the more she becomes a symbol of order in my eyes. When it comes to Furina, I'm very inclined to categorize her as a justice user, which does kind of seem like Captain Obvious because she's the Archon of Justice, but if you paid attention to my other region section, or if you're a Venti main such as myself, you'd know by heart that Venti is actually not a Freedom Book user. He uses Ballad, which makes a ton more sense because of his storytelling prowess, even to the point of telling us the Battle Pass tale. So with Furina's case, I want to properly demonstrate why I'm ruling out Order and equity. I feel like we can toss order out of the way easily with Furina because she seems to relish in courtroom drama first and foremost, and that often comes at the expense of following the rules, which is why in the Overture teaser, Neuvillette had to remind her to refrain from levity in the court. And she's just overall the exact opposite of Sirius, so yeah. I'm also ruling out equity, not because Furina is oppressive by any means, but it's just that the Travail teaser says she wants to judge other gods, and so that judgment can come across as more arrogant, and she also seems to act high and mighty for fun, which is not the opposite of fair, it just doesn't give fair vibes, if you get what I mean. Her condemnation of injustice and her putting pressure on Linné in the Archon quest as a prosecutor gives me the impression of her wielding that metaphorical sword of justice, which is why I really do believe that she will be a justice user, even if it's not automatic for an Archon to use the maths that describe their national value outright. For Arlecchino, I'm really not sure if she'll end up using Fontaine maths, if she even becomes playable, but I think it's likely because Linné said she does hail from this nation. With her running the House of the Hearth, with her very heavy-handed prevention of betrayal, and just an overall control over the orphans, I'd categorize her as an order user for her sort of disciplinarian role as the orphanage's father. However, I think there's still the possibility of her actually being a justice user because Linné told us the story of how Arlecchino killed someone who was trying to commit SA against Lynette, which is giving some vigilantism energy which fuels the justice vibes. Although I don't think her actions are objectively just in the grander scheme of things, she might be someone who views her actions as being the exemplification of justice, and her character can provide commentary on the pitfalls of viewing yourself as the pinnacle of justice, even if you're trampling on the rights of some other people to reach your lofty goals. That's also why I would easily rule her out as an equity user, because come on, what Harbinger advocates for equal rights? They're literally not respecting the sovereignty of other nations, so you can most likely chill on Mondays already if you're an Arlecchino simp. As a bonus, I'd just like to touch on Chiori a bit since she seems to be an Inazuman-born immigrant living in Fontaine who might become playable in the future. Just based on her role as a meticulous tailor, I want to assign her as Justice simply because I think she would view ugly clothes as like an injustice to fashion or an insult to the arts. I don't know, it's just a weird vibe I'm getting. Please don't farm for her yet, I'm begging. Because I excluded Freminet, Neuvillette, and Risley from the cast today, that's all the characters we can attempt to categorize for now. And I hope that this has somehow entertained you or made you more aware of the possible value system each character possesses and the nuance in identifying their approaches to justice. Hopefully that would psych yourself up to hoard talent mats if you find yourself liking many characters who use the same talent mats, or it could assist you with any future character analyses you'd like to make or even help you with understanding your own values better. Personally, I think my favorite out of the 3 Fontaine talent mats is actually equity, because the whole equal rights sentiment speaks to me. What about you guys? Which talent books do you think you'll farm the most for? And which characters from Fontaine are you saving for? Do you agree with my perceptions or not? Let me know in the comments below, and please do make sure to subscribe to this channel if you found this little observation and speedy character analysis to be helpful and or interesting. That's all for today. I just wanted to share this little observation with you guys, and hopefully next time I can give you another deep dive into one particular character instead. So I'll see you when I discuss that.